I just got that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight is November 30th. This is the Horsehead Central School District Board of Education public hearing on the proposed capital referendum on December 7th, entitled Horsehead 2030 Continuing to Build. Tonight's public hearing will be first to discuss the project, just so that that's what we do for the board. After the completion of that, the board will open it up for any public comment at that point. Today is not about any changes in the project. It's more about public comment or thoughts, as the board has already authorized the project to go to vote. This is not a required meeting. We just think as the Board of Education Administration that we try to do this to follow suit with all of our other procedures that we put before the voters. And we wanted to keep the interest of transparency with the public hearing for public comment. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to the president of the Board of Education, the secretary.
Great. I welcome everybody. I'd like to call the meeting to order. So if everybody could please stand and join me in the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So I would like to turn it over to Chad for our presentation.
While Chad's getting ready, Chad Silberg is the project manager for Hunt Engineers, Architects, and Surveyors who have been contracted by the board for the first part of the project, continuing on the second. In addition, ladies and gentlemen, all information on the budget or the project development can be found on the Horsehead website, as the information has been regularly put up by our communication information specialist, Sue Perzolo. If you have any additional questions or anything that you'd like to comment, please contact either the district clerk or Ms. Perzolo, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible to try to get you any potential answers that you may need. Ladies and gentlemen, Chad, are you ready? I'm ready. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for having me back again. We'll run through the presentation here on the next phase, next referendum for the 2030 continuing to build. Andy, if you want to go ahead and go through that slide. I'll just quickly go over kind of the process that the district, as well as myself and Hunt, have gone through, primarily the district over the last couple of years in terms of coming up with evaluation of the district's configuration. And the district this past year did a pretty extensive workshop in-house to evaluate kind of how the buildings are structured within the district. And this is all stemming from an earlier study that the district did in terms of evaluating the age of the buildings and the amount of work that needs to be done in the buildings and identifying how the district wanted to lay out. The ultimate goal as seen was that Center Street really was looking to be repurposed to another purpose within the district. And what it took to make that happen, whether it was district office or it's maintenance or it's some other process that needs to go into that building, what it takes in the rest of the buildings to be able to make that happen and have that accomplished. So the district went through and looked at how the overall K through 12 or pre-K through 12 would be structured within the district. They evaluated all the way from the old model from when I was in high school, in school here, a pre-K through 6, and a 7-8 middle school and a 9-12, all the way to a single campus, a pre-K through 12 campus. And it was right in this room that they went through the pros and the cons and listed out all, I think it was 12 or 13 different options the district went through. And they evaluated the pros and cons of each of those, and ultimately concluded that the structuring of the district was the appropriate structure. What I mean by that is keeping the grade levels aligned as they currently are. Meaning elementary schools being pre-K through 4, having an intermediate school, which is 5-6, a middle school, which is 7-8, and then a high school, which is 9-12. So then once the district went through that, we began evaluating what it would take at each of the elementary buildings, 3 remaining elementary buildings, to be able to take on that student body from Center Street, that building was. So as you can see, the next step was to develop the building plans. I'll get into those a little bit more. And part of development of that was evaluating the needs, the outstanding needs within each of the buildings. So it wasn't just simply to look at what does it take to close Center Street, but in the process, what does it also take to right size those existing classrooms in the Gardner Road, Ridge Road, and Big Flats, as well as any special education needs that were currently lacking in the building. So this was the opportunity to identify those needs that are lacking and address those at the same time. We also began to prioritize those needs within each of the buildings and then ultimately develop a financial plan. We've currently been working with the construction manager as well as Welliver, as well as Mike, the district to start talking very preliminary about a schedule and how this would lay out. But we haven't really finalized a lot of that. But there is I've got another slide here that'll get into that. All right, thank you. So Big Flats, we at each of the elementary schools, you're going to see a theme here, and that theme resounds around the fact that as you increase the student population at these buildings, the core services of those buildings, as well as the classrooms, need to be enlarged. And when I say core spaces, I'm talking about the gymnasium, the cafeteria, and the library. Those 3 spaces, as they currently stand in these 3 buildings, in some ways even lack the current student population. So as we evaluated what it would take if there was an increase in student population, we looked at how would we utilize the existing spaces as well as minimize the amount of new spaces that would be needed. A lot of that has to do with financial aid and how it gets sent from the state. But we really wanted to capitalize on maximizing the amount of aid that we would get from New York State, which then obviously helps with the financial side of the problem. So ultimately, the decision was made as during discussions with New York State Education Department that the best way to maximize our aid was to build a new gymnasium in these buildings. And then that begins to allow a puzzle to form in place. So if you build a new gymnasium, and that's what you're seeing in blue on that screen, it's a new gymnasium, as well as some classrooms, because obviously we've got to add classrooms. But the new gymnasium with bleachers and a stage, so it replaces that smaller stage that's in the current cafeteria. So a right-sized gymnasium with a stage, that then allows us the opportunity to take the current gymnasium, which is in the center of that yellow portion, and turn that into the new cafeteria / kitchen. And that's a little bit more space. As you can see on the plan, it's actually not just a little, it's a pretty significant amount more space for that cafeteria function, which solves that influx of students. And then ultimately, by doing that, it'll freeze up the cafeteria to become the new library. And what's really nice, in my opinion, about that is it gives you the appropriate amount of space for the library, but because the existing height is already there, it allows us some opportunities to even create different level spaces within that potentially. Maybe a raised reading room, certainly no second floors or anything like that. That's all we're talking about, but the opportunity to maybe create a couple of steps up where there's a reading area that feels kind of separated from the main library. And then we've got some site work here, some playground improvements, as well as some mechanical upgrades. And in each of these buildings, anywhere that we're doing new building, that's the light blue, those spaces are all getting climate control. So those would all get obviously new heating and cooling and overall climate control within them, as well as the yellow spaces. So any space that's new, any space that is renovated would all get the climate control, but it would not be the whole. So the gray areas would be the next phase, and that would get implemented as part of the Andy. Thank you. Ridge Road, again, same theme here, a little bit different just because of the site and how the building lays out and restrictions on where we can add on. Here, we had to think a little bit more out of the box and not build a brand new gymnasium. So you can kind of see where the existing gymnasium is where that yellow and blue is, that's where the existing cafeteria is, I'm sorry, gymnasium is a cafeteria. We want to still turn that into the gymnasium, but instead of building a whole new gymnasium, we're essentially building over that footprint and expanding. So it ends up being the same size as the Big Flats Gymnasium. It's all new with this stage, same concept as Big Flats, but because of the site restrictions here, we're basically building it over top of the existing. Again, it still gives us the opportunity to take the existing gymnasium, turn that into the new cafeteria and kitchen so that it's appropriately sized, and the library that gets to expand in the location at the bottom of the end. Again, another classroom addition to help with the expansion. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, trying to tweak it.
Yep. Help with the influx of students as we've talked about. Again, mechanical upgrades here, the yellow and the blue will all be climate controlled. There is some parking, as you'll notice in the blow up on the top left. We are suggesting that we would expand the bus loop out there on Ridge Road. Widen in that small blow up is the road that runs perpendicular on the up and down on the screen. While Ridge Road is the one that runs across. So that's where the current bus loop, you kind of can see the current bus loop is underlaid below that dark gray area. So we're looking at expanding that bus loop to help with the student and the bus traffic. All right, I'm good for the next one again. Gardner Road is a slightly different because that actually has a larger gymnasium and larger cafeteria than Big Flats and Ridge Road do. It's a different generation that they built this building. It's not built at the same time that the other three elementary schools were. So it's a little bit different. It's got a larger gym, but we are still talking about a complete renovation. And there is some old locker room space and storage space that's kind of inefficient and not utilized as best as it could. So we've got an opportunity here to include that in the renovation area, possibly expand it for maybe some more bleachers that might be in that area. But we are looking at that as well as the cafeteria, keeping the cafeteria in the current location, but again, complete renovation. We're actually even talking about maybe some reconfiguration to help with student flow through the kitchen, the serving line. And then ultimately the library as well, staying in the current location, but a full renovation. And the idea is that at the end of this project, all three elementary schools would have an updated and upgraded gymnasium, cafeteria, and library. Again, classroom addition across the top, and all of these spaces would be climate controlled. There is one unique thing about Gardner Road that the district has done to set them up. And we talked about this in a lot of presentations about this project being multiple phases and doing things so that we maximize the aid from the state and minimize the impact of the local share. And what that's created is it's created this system of doing it in pieces, so to speak. And that's Gardner Road's actually reaping the benefit of that here in this project. So Gardner Road was one of the ones that as a district we decided to already do a lot of that infrastructure in the first referendum. So all of the infrastructure for climate control through the whole building at Gardner Road was already put in place in this project, the current one that's under construction. So now in this referendum, we actually have the opportunity to come in and provide the climate control for the whole building. So this building, it won't just be the renovated and new spaces because of the infrastructure that's already been put there. This one has the capability to do it. And we would definitely be setting up Ridge Road and Big Flats to be doing the same thing. The idea is that we build the infrastructure for Ridge Road and Big Flats in this project, and the next one would then bring that. All right, Andy. Middle school is very focused on the site. You know, we've done, I think, a lot of improvements. The district has done a lot of improvements with the help of the town out on Sing Sing to improve the traffic flow on Sing Sing Road itself. But then the district also improved that entrance and limited the 2 exits that used to be really awkward coming out of that main parking lot of the middle school. So we redirected that. And now in this project, the idea is that if you look at that upper plan, the light gray is the portion we already completed. The dark gray, all moving to the right, is what we're proposing to replace in this project. And that does 2 things. One, it replaces the parking lot that is severely dilapidated. It's severely in need of repair. And I'm sure Mike can come up here and talk about the amount of times his guys have gone in there to repair that parking lot to just keep it alive. And it's at the point where it's struggling to be kept alive. So this gives us an opportunity to replace that parking lot and make that parking lot whole, but also gives us an opportunity to improve the traffic flow. I think if, you know, I had a son that went here before this work was even done. And I refused to drop him off with this because I wasn't going to deal with the traffic. I have a daughter who now just went into 9th grade, and last year I occasionally allowed her to be picked up from the school because I thought it had gotten a little bit better with the entrance. I am confident that with the way that this rotation is going to work, it's going to make an improvement. Parents, as they're picking up and dropping off, bus drivers as they're trying to navigate, and staff as they're trying to get in and out of them. So a lot of improvements in that parking lot that's going to help with the traffic flow and really is going to finalize all of the problems that we've dealt with. Moving to the building side, there's roof replacements that I'm not showing on this plan, but it's fairly extensive. Roof replacements that'll bring that building up to completely within warranty, which would be great. The gymnasium in the center is part of a full renovation in the project, and locker rooms. Essentially, the gymnasium stays the same layout as it is today, but completely renovated. All new folding doors. The folding doors have a lot of issues. The backboards and all of that gets upgraded. The locker rooms are a slight reconfiguration, mostly because I think there's a more efficient way to lay those out. And then one last thing here you'll notice is, much like Gardner Road, this has a yellow outline around the building. This is another building where the district in the current referendum already put all the infrastructure in place at the middle school. And now we're taking the opportunity to make this building as well. So that would be the heating system as well as the cooling system being upgraded for efficiency as well. Some playground improvements, and that would pretty much be the most. Andy, can I give you that? To the high school. For the high school, we had a couple of great tours that we've offered over the past couple of weeks. So you had an opportunity to see what we've been doing here. And if you haven't seen it, there's a lot going on. We have a major renovation project going on in what used to be the old North Wing. Classrooms, we've got contractors in here on second shift every night. We've got Welliver here every night. Working on that old North Wing as well as the new main entrance area. So, you know, this building has got a lot of construction going on. But as part of the next referendum, as we had talked about all along, the next step to this is to improve the physical education space in this building. Currently in this building, you've got a small south gym, a small north gym, a weight room, a wrestling room. They're all kind of spread out. And the original concept here was to bring all of those activities together in one place. Minus the pool. You know, we don't ever intend to relocate the pool. The pool will stay where it is. But we do want to bring all of that physical education to one location. So one large gymnasium space that breaks out into 3 smaller spaces. The weight room there, the wrestling room there, the cheerleader practices there. Everything comes to physical education and after school activities all come to this central location for physical education. So that's mostly a renovation project. There is some additions. There is a second floor that we're talking about now as a running track. So the idea is that instead of having students running all through the hallways in the winter time as they're running the track, we have an opportunity to give them a safer place to conduct that. This building is already climate controlled, so I don't really need to say that, but I will say that. Obviously, the new spaces will continue to be climate controlled. All of the spaces that we've touched in the current project are climate controlled. There's a few spaces, very few spaces. The wood shop is not being done in this project, and that's because it's still got that third referendum with the idea that the STEM suite that we can get included in kind of where the puzzle seems to be missing. Site, we are doing, to move to the site on the east side of the building, that's the current bus loop, you'll see a large area of gray improvements, we are talking about improving that whole, replacing all of that asphalt. Again, just because it's in desperate need of replacement, but we're also looking to improve the circulation of those buses through that space. And this is the stadium. So the stadium, the top left picture, you can kind of get a sense of the field. You've got, it's really grayed out, and it's tough to see here, but you've got your stadium entry, I call it the stadium entry building, where the concessions and everything is bathrooms. And then you can see how on each side of that, we're proposing to flank that with locker rooms. To the top of that blow up on the top left-hand corner is what we would be proposing as the visitor locker room. And then to the bottom of that is the home room. The idea there being that as visitors come in, the visiting bus comes in, it can pull along the railroad tracks right in front of that building, unload the athletes into the locker room, and they can then come onto the field. They'll be coming onto the field as their parents are in the visitor locker room and looking at them. And then vice versa, they'll be able to leave through the locker room straight onto the bus, no crossing of any of the home and away athletes or the spectators. And then the home side down on the bottom, the idea there is that as they enter the field, they're entering it facing the home bleachers. We are looking at, you can kind of see from the image on the bottom left-hand corner, there's some grade change between the drive down to the field. I really like the idea of trying to create kind of a plaza there for parents to wait for their athletes to get done changing and come out. Right now, if you go to an event, parents, well, right now we don't really have locker rooms on the stadium, but right now the parents just wait inside the stadium for their students to get done and get changed and come out. The idea would be if we can empty that stadium as quickly as possible, that allows Mike and his crew to get in there and start cleaning up night events, weekend events. The idea is to get everybody out of that stadium, and by giving them this plaza area with benches and other features, it gives them somewhere to go and wait for them to get changed and, you know, either celebrate or talk about how they can be better next time. It just gives them a place to go instead of hanging out inside the stadium. We do have a blow up there on the top right of each of the different features. The idea there is not to get into too much detail, is obviously locker rooms that support the facility that's needed for each of the different sports. Bathrooms, showers, coaches room, as well as coaches bathroom. And then on the left-hand side of that top, you'll notice there's a whole other set of storage. The idea there is that we provide marching band storage right here on the field that gives them access directly to the field. And then also an opportunity to give an officials room. So when you've got officials to come, they've got a place to change and get ready before. That's good. So this is just an overview of the cost by building. You can see the total at the bottom, about $122,254,193. That's the value of the referendum. And this just breaks it down by building, cost per building. The column in the center there is, I mentioned earlier, I would get to schedule a little bit. Those are our earliest dates that we can receive a building permit from New York State Education. And that has to do with how often your aid cycles and when a building permit can be issued. And not to get too deep into it, it's basically every 5 years. So, you know, every 5 years, you are able to go and do a project. So those dates right there are the date that we can get the building permit. But what that means is I can spend a year or 6 months or whatever it takes to prepare those documents. The idea would be prepare the documents and have them submitted. We can't submit them any sooner. Not that I don't want to give the impression that this is the schedule and these are the dates we're going to submit on, but these are our, we can't go any sooner. So, you know, for instance, I'll draw attention to the high school. The high school right now, we can't get a building permit until March of 2024. So when you begin laying out all these schedules and how long it takes to do, you know, the meetings with all of the administration and the staff and the users, and I think we had great experience last time that we would pulling together student council and lots of other different avenues to gain that feedback. To probably build these buildings and then shoot for that 2024 for the high school. Conversely, and I'm not sure why this still hasn't been changed, but the stadium locker room shows 2023. That is not accurate because the stadium entry building does not generate aid. It doesn't have to fall in that 5-year plan. So, and that's getting a list. So a building, different buildings generate different types of aid. And because this one is not tied to that 5-year clock, essentially, we can start work on that stadium locker room. There's no delay that needs to happen. We can start designing that immediately. We can get that into New York State with a building permit and turn that around pretty quick. So there's no restrictions on that stadium locker room. The intermediate school is also one that, because of the way the aid is worked at that building, we don't have to wait for that one. We have aid available at that building where we could actually begin design and start working on middle school as well. So those are the two. But again, we've got Welliver and Hunt, and the owner have a lot to still do to finalize all those schedules, what can be built, how much, there's one thing to say how much can Hunt design, there's a whole other thing to talk about how many contractors do we have in the area, how much can we actually feasibly build at any given time. So there's a lot there still to work out. But that gives you an idea of the cost per building. That is a complete cost. So that is not the cost of construction. That is the cost of the project. And that, not to get too deep into this, but there's the cost of building, and then there's the cost to do the building. And what I mean by that is when you do a building, you've got to test the soil. So you've got to have testing for that. You've got asbestos on the fields. You've got to have testing for that. We've got architects' fees, there's construction managers' fees, there's lawyers' fees, that ends up being somewhere around 18 to 20%. So about 18 to 20% of your cost is just the cost of doing a project construction. So that is that number that you're seeing there is completely everything all inclusive. That's not just the construction cost, just the I'll turn it over to
Well, my name is Michael Scotty, I'm with Fiscal Advisors, and we do the assistant district with the financial side of the capital project. My main focus is maximizing the building need, assisting with the state aid finances, to ensure that the building flows on a time basis, and aligning that with the debt service. Working with the district and fund, which is involved with the capital project team, the proposition amount is $122,990,000. The state building aid ratio is 82.1%, which means for every dollar that he's eligible, the state can reimburse you 82.1 cents on the dollar. The district will be applying $10 million of capital reserves, and on an annual basis, $1 million. That's equal to the existing district resources. On an annual basis, the district undertakes a $1 million capital project paid with cash. The district will then start building the budget. Will then 15 increments contribute $1 million to debt service to offset the local share of tax. The maximum tax impact is over $2.5 million. The tax rate per 1,000 is $1 and a little over 9 cents. What does that actually mean? On a $100,000 full value home, it's $109.90. If you have the basic star, your local annual impact is 76.93 cents per year, and with enhanced star, it's 32.2 cents, and that's based on 21, 22 assessed values. It's really, when you look at it a little bit harder, what does that actually mean? Monthly impact, it's $9.16. Weekly, it's $3.11. Unless stop at Dunkin' Donuts, it's affordable. And we broke it down to a daily impact, it's about 30 cents per day. But again, we're going to be looking at this again as things move, meaning cost of construction. Sometimes there's fluctuations in building aid ratios and stuff like that. My job is to really work with the district on engineers to make sure that we stay, the project stays on track from day one to the day we submit the final cost reports. And our projected building is exactly what we're projecting today is. Thank you.
And if I can address the board just real quick on financials, one of the things that we need to emphasize to the community, as always, is this is the most conservative estimate. It's something that we pride ourselves on trying to do, is the worst case scenario. The issue why I say worst case scenario is because we build in a certain interest rate, I think roughly 3%. And if the board remembers, the community members, the last project we built in a 4%, and our interest rate was, I think. So what happens is we have a high interest rate, so this is the maximum that we estimate any cost. Because ultimately it comes down to what the bids are, how much the project costs. We cannot go over this amount, but we can go under it. And then ultimately over the course of the 5 or 6 years to get to the end of a project and finally bond it out, what happens is the district's tax rate is subject to rises and falls. Best part about our project from the last time is we estimated a tax impact conservatively about $40 a year per 100,000. Right now, that never materialized, and at the conclusion of this project is projected to be a tax decrease with our budgets for 4 to 5 years and the project that we were just completing. Right now with this, these are rough estimates and most conservative, but we received some good news today already that the district's wealth value, which goes into our budgetary calculation, is almost double the growth factor from last year, which is good because the growth factor goes up. The tax rate gets spread out across the full value of the district and lowers the tax rate. Again, that's what we estimate, and we estimate as this being a trend. And the district has almost a 15 to 20 year trend of doing this, all except for really 1 year when gas valuations were taken up. So my administrative team and I know the board appreciates this, that's what we strive to do, is how can we bring the most financial value back to the district from the state level that the community regularly pays in, that has gone to every other district. What we're doing now, like in the last project, is trying to maximize that to make the local share as little as possible. Our hope is that when we're at the end of this project, if it's passed, that number will be just like this last number, possibly 0. And we have a track record. So that's what we're hoping. But again, these are the most conservative estimates. So on the high side, on the low side, I think we all try to prepare even in our own budgets for the worst case, so that it comes out better, it's much better. As far as Welliver, who is our construction manager, everything has been sort of vetted throughout this. These are reasonable. We have had questions about, well, if this is the second project, what's the third? The community was told back in 2017, we expected at least 3 potential $100 million, slightly over, those projects to fully renovate the entire district and to try to also make savings across that time, such as in energy and everything else. The first one was 94, this one's slated at 122. Third project would be really right sizing the rest of the classrooms, as well as finishing up the high school and really pulling the district equal to all the other districts where they've been over the past 10 years. Unfortunately, we do not know what the last project will be because everything always is subject to fluctuations. That's why it's important for districts when we do have an approved project to get it locked in on the books as quick as possible to fill the money locked. You can't estimate a third project when we haven't designed it, even though we know what we're thinking, because it's almost 4 or 5 years away and locked and changed. But we know that it's probably along the lines of the and our goal is to try to do it as least impactful on the local level. Anything else, Katie? Because Katie's my financial person. Fiscal advisors.
We also have extra 5% built in this. They're in-house building aid. Then we always try to.
Yeah, you can say that.
We have an added 5% built in, so of every cost, every dollar that's in there, we just assume 95% building aid. So by doing that, it even helps protect the local share so that when, at the end of the day, when I do the final cost report is submitted, hopefully we can recoup that 5% and there's no reason. So it's just another added level heading that goes into this, and goes to the most conservative estimate you're just talking about.
And I don't like the word padding, but in a construction project, when you go at home, normally your contractor is told, make sure you allot for 20% excess rate waste, or when you're ordering, it's not padding, it's the reality, something may come in broke, or you may find something you have to do. Like in this last project, we found about 30 cesspools that we never knew we were going to remove, so we had to act. Just to make some humor, you don't want to do that often, but a project of this size and scope would always have that type of conservative estimate, so that you don't get to a point where money's run out and you have to cut every project. So that's what we use fiscal advisors, Lover, and the architects for, to try to make sure that we ensure that A, we have the right project on cost and on opportunity to be successful. So at this point, this would conclude our presentation. I do have some statements at the end from some people that have asked me just a question that I can try to clarify for the board. But at this point, it's time to open the floor over to public hearing.
Okay, so if anybody in the audience has any questions or comments, feel free to come on up to the podium and state your name and your address, please, for the record, but then also you can ask questions.
So I'm in the very your one. When you show 100,000 full value. How many homes in this county is over 100,000? How did you arrive at that number? Is that an average?
What we do is we use 100,000 because it's an easy number for people to reference the home situation. If you have a $50,000 home at 109 is cut in half, 70, the 76 would be cut in half, or the 32 would be cut in half. It's just so that people can do their own mathematical situation.
Not even over 100,000.
Yes, so if yours
So
is,
how many homes is that?
first of all, we have $2.2 billion in value just in the Horse district. So each has a proportional rate, and that's what that tax rate is. So what happens is it just depends on the property and the assessed value. We give the denominator so you can calculate your situation. Because I can't tell you how many people have the enhanced star, basic star. That's all through the assessors. That's not something we do. We're the assessing agency. But if I have a $150,000 home, it's going to be about $160 a year, one time over 16 years. And that's if those that the most conservative bear out at the end of the project. But that most homes don't not have some type of star.
How far into the future have you looked as far as the economy is concerned? The economy that we have today.
We take our projections just like Ms. Pizzetti does in everything that we do and look at the trends. And that's why like I'm able to announce tonight that we've been informed that the growth rate for next year already that we have to build in has doubled for horses. So where last year we grew by, I think it was $15 million. Next year, horses value of assessed value is increasing by over 30 million if it's proportional. I just don't know that number. But that's how we make our long-term trends. And if you go to look at the future, You can't predict the economy, which is what you're asking. But you do look at your trends, and those trends have shown that, I think, what was that? Mr. Betty, we've grown by 400 million over the last 10 years. Our tax rate change has been 1.8% over 10 years, that's 0.18% each of those years to get to that point. I don't believe any district's doing that. And then on top of it, I don't believe any district's doing that, doing the construction that we just did. And that's my goal that the board charges me with is to try to get the best financial offer for the district to move forward and minimize the local tax base. That's what I believe the record showed.
How much has been built in as far as, or projected as far as material and labor?
That is built in as a yearly escalation that's done by Welliver. They do it for each year of the project. That is built into that number.
How much is it?
They usually do a 2.5%, 3%, 4% a year escalation each year. Now, like our last project, oil dropped, and they had a huge escalation in oil. That's helped our project. That's the problem. When you're doing estimates, you have to go by what the market trends are. That's why we hire people.
Well, the market trends are very good to go by, except for in times like this.
But we've been doing all of our construction during conflict.
That was already improved.
Yeah, yeah.
This is yet to be improved.
Oh.
Wow. I just think it's a lot to ask the taxpayers.
Certainly understand. That's why the taxpayers get the final decision.
I know it would be based on results. Like I say, I mean, we're talking 8 years out.
Talking 5 to 6.
I thought it was 2030.
No, the project, when it was initially approved by 82% of the voters, was Horsehead's 2030 was the concept of trying to do all the projects by 2030. If possible, it might be 2030, 2032. It was aspirational. We're using it as a title so people don't get confused by this project, that project. That's why the first one was Horsehead's 2030, building our future now. It was the start. The second one, we've entitled Continuing Our Build. The third one probably will be Finishing the Build, but we're just not there yet.
Thanks.
And again, trying to bring money that all of our taxpayers pay into the city back to the Horseheads instead of sending it to every other school in the state. That's what we're trying to do. Because you guys deserve that.
Pardon me?
Because you guys, your children, your grandchildren, all deserve that instead of our money going to them schools. And we're trying to do it as economically possible.
Just think it's a big chunk of money. Thank you.
No, thank you. I appreciate you coming out.
Any other questions? Any questions?
Not really a question, only a statement. I just, as an educator for 34 years, am so pleased with the decision to keep the current configuration as it is. K4, 5, 6, 7, 8, high school. I think,
Sorry. Sue was telling me.
I think it is emotionally, physically, and educationally the best way to configure for our students. As a homeowner in Horseheads for 43 years, I see this project to finish, soon to become, to be absolutely an amazing venture for our community. I think with what all has been done and what is going to be done, along with our administration, all of our staff, and the superior teachers that we have in this district, that Horseheads will be a stellar school district in New York State. And I'm so proud to just be a small part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. If I can add to Ms. Corbett's statement, just because there's one thing I know we forgot. I did receive a question about why Center Street closing. One is, it is the oldest building and it is unfortunately built during a time of asbestos and lead use. It's not unsafe for our students right now because we haven't touched it. Everything's encapsulated. It's been checked. I think Mr. Coughlin does that. But one of the questions was, well, why don't you renovate it? And one of the difficulties is if you touch the building, you now need to bring it all to code. That means all the lead must be abated, I believe, first. And then after that, all the asbestos has to be abated. So you're really stripping the entire building. The cost of that is so substantial that it could potentially eat a vast majority of the money that came from the state, that to rebuild it in a timely fashion, the entire build and rebuild would have to be funded by the local taxpayers. So people have asked, well, why is it good for adults? Well, it's good for adults because it is a solid building. In addition, the adults do not necessarily have to worry about lead paint because we've been taught well enough that we don't put the paint in our mouth, and that's what we worry about. And if there's asbestos abatement, if it's sealed, a lot of the times we all deal with that. As long as it's sealed and undisturbed, there is no risk, and it's a solid building, so adults would be able to handle it much better. Additionally, because of its location, it's not a building that the district would really sell, but all of our studies before I came indicated that that building was at sort of the end of its useful life for education purposes because of the cost factor. But on top of it, it would be beneficial to the district to use it as office space, community space, as well as facility space. The reason being is anything for district office or administration, anything for facilities, any community center must be fully borne the cost of renovation and new construction by the local tax base. Because we've tried to strategically use Center Street and get it set, all students are in the building for that future endeavor. That will virtually save the potential of building a separate district office and a separate facility center. Roughly anywhere from $5 to $12 million for the district because the building's already paid for. And if there's renovations, those can be handled internally because the amount of change is not really drastically eat into asbestos areas. So the district, the Board of Education are trying to find the best way to have everything, but do it at the most efficient cost. And that means that Center Street were selected in this project approved. Center Street would, at the end of it, once we transition students to their new boundary buildings, would then be converted into a district office, district facility center, additional educational space if needed, as well as a community center to bring our senior centers back and the community's youth bureau in, so that it is truly a center, community center for the district and can be used during the day as well as evening. So that was one of the questions that I received. Some of the people have asked, what is the cost of the stadium? It seems like a small fortune. The actual first part of the stadium is $3.9 million. That's actually relatively cheap for a multi-surface, athletic complex. The additional right now is estimated at 3.5. That's because of the additional gear up. And that doesn't mean that it's going to cost that. It's just what they have placed in as the potential estimate, depending on when it would be started. I believe they did the estimate for 2023, and if we could do it for 2022, that would even potentially have the ability to save some financing. This should be the last installation of anything at the stadium at that point. And a lot of people ask, well, why didn't you just do it in the first place? It comes down to the fact that we are only given so much money by the state to do things outside of the building that are incidental costs. So we tried to maximize for the architect the money that we would receive, so it would be very little or no impact to the local taxpayer. That's the same thing that we're doing here, even though we have some of the inconvenience of not having the locker rooms the first couple of years. The cost of getting that 82 to 90% from the state in sort of the aidability and projects. What happens is that helps us to try to be as fiscally as possible, whether it comes from the state or from our own resources. Solar and renewables are not part of this project, but it is something that district facility manager, district facility director is looking at in the future, but there are some drawbacks to it because we have to have property as well, and we just don't want to give away the energy renewables for just some quick savings versus better savings. So third stage, players have had locker rooms to use, but we're just making do with what we have right now in the hopes that this project comes through, all our locker room issues will be taken care of. And one of the big things that we did not talk about is by refocusing the outside sports and the internal sports all at one end of the building, we can now physically shut off the rest of the building so that only a small portion is used, which potentially gives great energy savings. And I think I covered everything that somebody asked. So thank you for bringing it.
Any other comments from anybody? Okay, so motion to adjourn. Second. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. Any abstentions?
And we hope that everybody will come out 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. next Tuesday, December 7th, in the high school South Gymnasium to participate in the capital referendum. Thank you.